over at citizen.org, there's an analysis of the TPP. I'll just read some of the pieces of it to you. The TPP lowers U.S. tariffs to zero, giving our competitors unfettered access to U.S. markets, while some other countries are allowed dramatically longer periods of time to open their markets. And one of the things that they're not even discussing is that while our tariffs are at zero, Peru maintains 15%, a 15% VAT tax, a value-added tax, a VAT tax, which is functionally a tariff. 16% in Mexico, 15% in New Zealand, 8% in Japan, 19% in Chile. I think it's around 17% in Germany, although TPP doesn't include Germany. But basically, all these countries, they have VAT taxes, and they're using these as tariffs, and our tariff goes to zero. We get to be the suckers of the world once again. After all, we're the rich country, right? We're the richest country in the history of the earth. So let's take some of that money away. Now, I realize there are some people who say, and you know, mostly the shills for the big corporations that are negotiating the TPP, don't you care about poor people in Brunei? And, you know, I'll give you two answers to that. Number one, not at the expense of poor people in the United States. And number two, this isn't the way to help poor people in Brunei. If Brunei wants to get their act together, or Vietnam or any other country wants to get their act together, they should become self-sufficient in terms of manufacturing, just like us, or just like we were prior to 1980. I mean, we should be doing this too. I mean, look at what happened after World War II. Japan became a great economic powerhouse. Germany became a great economic powerhouse. I tell the story in my book, Rebooting the American Dream, of South Korea. South Korea in 1965, I think it was, might have been a little later than that. Might have even been the 70s. But South Korea, I'm pretty sure it was the mid-60s. The average per capita income was around $700 or $800 a year. A year. Right? People were making, you know, $60, $80 a month. $10, $20 a week in South Korea. Average household income, $800 a year, and their principal two exports were fish and human hair for wigs. These were the two principal exports of the country of South Korea. They were dirt poor. And General Park took over South Korea in a military coup and said, I'm going to turn this country into a great industrial nation, and I'm going to use the strategy that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton came up with to do it. He immediately put tariffs on the imports of any kind of product that could be manufactured in South Korea and started subsidizing the export of Korean manufactured goods. And Korea, you know, within a decade, Korea was seeing that their average household income was up over $20,000 a year. Now South Koreans have faster internet service than we do. They have better medical service than we do. They have better schools than we do. I mean, you just go right down through the list, right? Because South Korea still protects their export, or their imports, their domestic market. We won't. Okay, so number one, it lowers U.S. tariffs to zero. Number two, the ability of other countries like Vietnam to maintain their tariffs for a significant period of time will provide further incentives for U.S. companies to outsource production and offshore jobs. In other words, Vietnam will have 5 years. They can keep their tariffs in place. They note a good example of this is our experience with China, where more than 45% of the products produced by foreign invested enterprises are exported to the United States rather than sold to Chinese investors. In other words, 45% of the stuff that they make in China with companies that are funded by American companies, those products don't go to Chinese, they come to us. According to an initial analysis published in the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. market access concessions alone will increase the U.S. trade deficit on manufactured goods and auto parts by more than $55 billion, resulting in the loss of more than 330,000 American jobs. And then they point out tariffs are not the only impediment to U.S. exports to TPP countries. TPP countries with whom the U.S. does not have the existing free trade agreements have utilized various market access impediments. This is, I'm assuming that they're talking about things like VAT taxes and country of origin. In South Korea, if you're going to sell something in South Korea, a certain percentage of it has to be made there. Same thing in Japan, same thing in China. Not here. And then there's no addressing currency manipulation in this. The rules of origin, the single most critical area where the rules of origin concern domestic production and the workforce is the auto and auto parts sector. The TPP dramatically lowers the existing NAFTA agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement requirement, the 62.5% of content which itself did not work well and promoted a major production shift to Mexico, to a new 45% TPP-wide regional. Value content, it's really starting to get into the weeds here. Essentially, an auto made with 55% Chinese content could be considered to be made in the United States under the TPP. 55% Chinese content car. Because now, in order to call it made in the United States, it used to be under the previous trade deals, if you wanted to call something made in the United States, it had to be 62.5% made in the United States. Under TPP, it only has to be 45% made in the United States. Why? Because we don't need no American workers. To hell with them. I got this thing called the value content standard based on the net cost method. This is why, most people are going to go, what? I don't know what you're talking about. But that's the section that says that, it's 45% American made. It's now made in the USA in the label. TPP text includes a new provision that would grant preferences for additional parts, these are auto parts, that would be considered to be made by a TPP country, whether or not they were in fact actually produced in those countries. In other words, you could make a cheap auto part in China, they sell it to Japan, Japan sells it to us, and at that point it's considered made in Japan. In addition, the rules of origin would potentially allow for further reductions in the value of content, or maybe they sell it to us, to a company in the United States, and then it's made in the United States. This is astonishing. Procurement chapter, rules on buy America, buy local, America's domestic producers and their employees, responsible purchasers. The TPP gives bidders from Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and other TPP countries expansive access to U.S. goods, services, and construction contracts. Yes, construction contracts. Vietnamese contractors can build things in the United States. I suppose they can right now, but somehow under the TPP, they do it in a way that actually benefits them and screws American contractors. And, we're still figuring this stuff out. The environment chapter doesn't mention global climate change, weak conservation rules.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
New rights for fossil fuel corporations to challenge climate protections? Brilliant. Brilliant.